The diner was almost empty when the man in the worn hoodie pushed open the glass door and stepped inside, and no one there could have guessed that the title "Billionaire Orders Cheapest Meal, Polite Waitress's Quiet Dignity Turns a Tiny Tip into Fortune" would someday make perfect sense. There was something uneasy in the way he paused near the entrance before taking a seat, like a secret was pulling at him from the inside, like he carried a weight no one could see. The cook barely looked up, but the young waitress named Mia glanced his way and sensed something strange about how he held himself, almost too careful, almost too aware of every gesture he made. He ordered the cheapest thing on the menu with a calm that felt practiced, as if he had rehearsed being a nobody. Mia treated him with the same warm tone she used for the tired trucker 2 stools down, and that alone made his eyes darken with an emotion he tried to hide. When he finished, he left a tiny tip, almost painfully small, and watched her from the corner of his eye. And right there, when she thanked him with the same gentle smile she gave everyone else, he felt a jolt that unsettled even his steady breath. Something was off, something bigger than this diner meal, and the way he stared at her hand dropping the tip into the shared jar made it clear that whatever was happening inside him had only begun to crack open, raising questions no one around him even knew existed. The man, Evan, had lived his entire adult life surrounded by polished floors, carefully chosen words, and people who brightened when they saw his last name on a document. He used to think that was normal, that the world naturally bent toward wealth the way metal bent toward a magnet, but years of quiet moments had shown him truths he wished he had never learned. He remembered business partners who claimed loyalty, but changed their tone if a deal shifted, friends who drifted away if he didn't fund their projects, and dates who seemed more interested in pictures than conversation. Even kind people sometimes couldn't see past the number attached to his signature. That steady ache made him withdraw from simple interactions like the ones happening inside this diner. He had wondered for weeks if anyone out there still treated strangers with honesty when money was removed from the picture. That thought kept him awake in hotel rooms and conference lounges, circling him like a cloud. The decision to walk into a random diner without his watch, without his driver, without the armor of wealth came from that wound, from an emptiness he never dared admit out loud. And as he sat there, he kept asking himself whether this small waitress would confirm everything he feared, or show him something he no longer believed existed. When Mia took the tiny tip from the counter, there was no flicker of disappointment, no sigh or raised eyebrow, only that soft nod she used whenever someone made even the smallest gesture of thanks. She moved toward the tip jar and slid the coins inside with the same fairness she used for every shift she worked. Then she checked on the family in the corner booth, smiled as the kids told her stories about their day, and grabbed extra napkins for an elderly couple that had wandered in from the cold. Her routine was simple, but the heart behind it was steady and real, and Evan felt something inside him twist in confusion because nothing in her behavior matched the reactions he had grown used to. He had expected a hint of annoyance or a change in tone, anything that would prove his theory that kindness relied on the size of a person's wallet. Instead, she gave equal care to every table, acted as if the tiny tip had the same worth as a generous one, and that chipped away at the belief he had carried for years. It was the inciting moment he didn't see coming. Watching her move with that natural dignity left him more unsettled than he wanted to admit, and a question began forming inside him, stubborn and sharp. What was it about her that rattled him so deeply, and why did such a small gesture feel like a blow to everything he thought he understood? Outside in the parking lot, the night air felt colder than it had when he arrived. Evan stood beside a car no one else knew was his, looking at his reflection in the dark window, trying to understand why his chest felt so tight. He replayed every detail of Mia's reaction, searching for signs of pretense or hidden motives, but found nothing except sincerity. The longer he thought about it, the more something in him began to crumble, kindness without calculation, fairness without performance. It was so different from what he had learned to expect that it left him unsure of his own judgment. He leaned against the car and felt pressure building in a way that made it hard to breathe. Everything he believed about people and money, everything that shaped how he protected himself, suddenly felt shaky like a wall losing bricks one by one. He realized he couldn't just walk away from this moment. Mia's quiet dignity wasn't just a pleasant surprise. It was a challenge that forced him to look at himself and the world around him. And as he gripped the edge of the car door, one thing became painfully clear. Whatever happened inside that diner had pushed him toward a decision he could no longer avoid. Evan straightened his posture, unlocked the car, and sat behind the wheel with a determination that felt heavier than any boardroom decision he had ever made. He pulled out his phone and called his driver, telling him to meet at sunrise. Tomorrow would not be another anonymous walk into a diner. Tomorrow he would return as himself, the man the world recognized, the man whose presence changed the energy of any room he entered. He imagined Mia seeing him dressed in the suit she never saw, speaking in the confident tone he had hidden, and wondered how she would react. Fear mixed with resolve inside him, because this next step wasn't just about confronting her. It was about confronting the possibility that someone out there could treat him as more than a wallet. He adjusted his watch, the one he had left behind earlier, and felt the weight of the moment settle into his chest. There was no going back. Whatever truth waited inside that diner the next day would change something in him forever. The question, pulsing like a heartbeat, was simple but terrifying. What would happen when Mia and the rest of the staff discovered who he truly was? Before we step into this moment, where Evan walks in as a completely different man from the one Mia saw yesterday, pause the video for a second and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had someone surprise you by showing a totally different side of themselves. Go ahead and comment, because your answer helps us move forward with the story and keeps this community growing. Thank you for doing that. Now let's continue. When morning came, the diner felt like it always did, with Mia wiping down the counters and humming softly while the coffee brewed. Nothing in her mind suggested that the man who had ordered the cheapest meal last night was about to walk in again, and certainly not in the way he did. The bell over the door rang lightly, and the whole room shifted as Evan stepped inside wearing a tailored suit, polished shoes, and a calm confidence that didn't match anything she remembered. Customers turned their heads. The cook froze mid-motion, and Mia felt her breath catch as she recognized the shape of his face, the way he held his shoulders, the same eyes but suddenly framed by a world she had never been part of. Shock washed over her, followed by a warm embarrassment, as if she needed to apologize for something she hadn't even done wrong. Evan walked toward her slowly, each step measured, not arrogant but serious, as if he understood how strange this must look. He stopped in front of her with a small, almost nervous smile, the kind she never expected from someone dressed the way he was. He greeted her by name, and that alone made her heart stumble. She managed a quiet hello, unsure if she should ask who he really was or pretend she already knew. Before she could speak again, Evan said he had returned to talk about yesterday. The words settled in the space between them like a weight, and the diner felt suddenly too silent, too attentive, as if the walls themselves were waiting for an explanation. Mia remembered the tiny tip, the hoodie, the humbleness in his posture, and the contrast cut through her like a sharp line dividing two worlds. She tried to keep her voice steady, asking if everything was all right, and he nodded, but there was something in his eyes that told her this was not a casual visit. Evan asked if they could talk somewhere a little quieter, and she led him to the far end of the counter, where the early rush hadn't started yet. His voice dropped into a softer tone, carrying a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. He told her he had thought a lot about the way she treated him the night before, how she never changed her attitude, even when the tip was barely enough to buy a pack of gum. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, unsure how to react because she had never expected praise or attention from someone like him. Kindness had always been her default, not something she calculated or performed. Hearing him speak that way made her realize he wasn't here to boast or flaunt anything, and that softened the tension in her chest. She thanked him gently, telling him she simply tried to treat everyone with respect because it was the right thing to do, and the way his expression shifted made her realize those words meant more to him than she understood. As Evan listened to her, something in his shoulders relaxed, like he had been carrying a question and finally heard the answer he needed. Gratitude flickered in his voice when he said he appreciated her fairness, especially when he hadn't given her much reason to offer it. She started to feel the earlier embarrassment fade into a deeper curiosity about why this mattered so much to him. Then he took a quiet breath, the kind that prepares the ground for something important, and told her there was more he needed to say, something that might change the way she understood everything that happened. The way he looked at her in that moment hinted at a truth she had not yet heard, a truth waiting just past the edge of his next sentence, and the weight of it made her pulse quicken with a question she couldn't hold back. What exactly had she stepped into without even knowing it? Evan stayed seated at the end of the counter for a moment, watching Mia try to steady herself after seeing him return in a way she never expected. He could tell she was still trying to make sense of it all, so he cleared his throat and spoke with a gentle honesty that softened the edges of his usual confidence. He told her he hadn't just come back to say thank you. He wanted to explain something that had been sitting heavy on his mind. Mia nodded, ready to listen even though her heart was beating fast. Evan admitted that the tiny tip he left wasn't a mistake or an accident. He had left it like that on purpose. She blinked, surprised, but instead of getting upset or pulling away, she only asked him why he felt the need to do that. There was no anger in her tone, no judgment, just simple curiosity, and that alone made him feel more exposed than any headline ever had. He told her he had been trying to understand how people treated him when they thought he had nothing, because most of his life he felt like his money stood in front of him before he could even speak. Mia absorbed that quietly, and when she finally responded, her voice was softer than he expected. She said kindness shouldn't depend on the size of a tip, and respect wasn't something she measured in dollars. It was just how she believed people deserved to be treated, no matter what they had. Moments like this can make anyone listening pause and think about the way small choices reveal who we are. Many people watching this right now have been in situations where a simple gesture meant more than it looked, and hearing others share those moments in the comments often reminds everyone that they're not alone in these feelings. This part of the story tends to connect people who have experienced something similar, and reading each other's thoughts can make the moment even stronger. Evan felt something shift inside him when she said that. He didn't know how to explain the mix of gratitude and guilt building in his chest. Gratitude because she had shown him a kind of honesty he'd stopped believing in, and guilt because he had tested her without telling her why. He apologized in a quiet, steady voice, saying he shouldn't have done it that way, and she shook her head gently, telling him people carry wounds she can't see, and maybe that was his way of trying to understand the world better. Hearing her speak with that kind of grace made him look at her differently, not as someone who passed through his day, but as someone who held a truth he had been chasing for years. The cook peeked over at them, noticing the serious tone, but Mia kept her focus on Evan, offering him a space to speak freely without feeling judged. He confessed that her reaction had stayed with him all night, making him question things he thought were already settled. She listened patiently, reminding him again that what she did wasn't special, at least not to her. It was just the way she believed people should treat each other. Their conversation began to soften the tension that had filled the room earlier, and Evan found himself leaning in, wanting to understand her view of the world. She explained how she grew up watching her mother work long shifts, knowing every little kindness mattered. She said that when people walked into the diner, she didn't see them as wallets or burdens, but as human beings trying to get through their day. Something about her words created a calm around them, a sense that they were finally stepping onto the same emotional ground. Evan nodded slowly, taking everything in, realizing he had walked in expecting answers but was instead finding a mirror he didn't know he needed. He felt a pull toward a new kind of clarity, one that made him rethink what he wanted to do next. But the thought forming in his mind wasn't ready to be spoken yet, and Mia could sense there was more he wasn't saying. She didn't press, letting the silence linger long enough for him to breathe through it. When he finally met her eyes again, there was something unresolved there. Something he was still gathering the courage to express, hinting that the next step he was considering might change far more than just their conversation today. Evan stayed at the counter a little longer than he expected, feeling a lighter air between him and Mia after their honest talk. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't trying to protect himself behind a wall of money or distance. Instead, he found himself wanting to understand the quiet world she lived in. His gaze drifted across the diner as the morning crowd slowly formed, each person entering with their own tired steps and everyday worries. Mia moved from table to table with a steady rhythm, and he noticed how she worked with the cook, Luis, trading quick glances and easy signals that kept the place running smoothly. Something about that teamwork made him curious. When she returned to pour him a refill, he asked how long she had been working there. She answered with a gentle smile, telling him about juggling shifts, helping her mum with bills, and splitting tips fairly with the staff so no one felt left out. The way she spoke made the job sound less like a paycheck and more like a small community stitched together by people trying their best. Evan listened closely, realizing he had never truly seen the inner life of a workplace like this, even though he owned dozens of restaurants inside his hotels. There was no bitterness in her voice, only a patient strength that came from experience, and it stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. She pointed out how Luis often worked double shifts to cover a co-worker who had a sick child, and how Sharon, the manager, stayed late after closing to help a server studying for her GED. Evan took all of this in with a growing sense of awe, because none of them acted like someone was watching. They simply cared about each other, even when the tips were small or the nights were slow. He found himself thinking about how different this was from the polished corporate halls, where people pretended to work as a team while silently trying to outdo each other. Here, the teamwork was real, and suddenly he wanted to know more. He asked Mia what she wished could improve in the diner, if money wasn't a barrier. She laughed softly, saying better chairs for the older customers, a grill that didn't stick, and enough pay so Luis didn't have to work so many doubles. The simplicity of her answer made him quiet, because to him those things sounded so easy to fix, yet they seemed out of reach for people working this hard every day. It made him rethink the way he viewed the employees in his own hotels, wondering how many stories he had missed, because he never stepped into their world long enough to see their struggles up close. A thought began forming inside him, gentle but persistent, almost like a seed pushing through. Sometimes in a moment like this, when someone starts seeing things differently for the first time, there's a quiet shift that seems small now, but will echo in a much bigger way later. Decisions born in moments like these tend to circle back with powerful consequences, and anyone listening can feel that something important is starting to take shape. As Mia talked about how they all tried to help each other through slow weeks and unexpected expenses, Evan felt the idea growing stronger. What if workplaces like this, and the ones he owned, didn't leave their staff to struggle alone? What if there was a way to share success instead of guarding it at the top? He didn't say any of this out loud yet, but the thought kept turning, becoming clearer with each detail she shared. He asked about her own dreams, and she shrugged softly, saying she didn't dream big anymore, just hoped for stability and a little extra money so she could help her mother fix the old car that kept breaking down. Something about that answer, said with no bitterness despite everything she carried, hit him harder than he expected. Her humility wasn't weakness. It was strength shaped by responsibility and sacrifice. He nodded slowly, promising himself he wouldn't forget this conversation. Mia noticed the seriousness in his eyes and asked if he was all right. He said he was, but she sensed he was thinking about something he wasn't ready to share yet. Their conversation settled into a gentle quiet, both of them knowing something significant had shifted, even if neither could name it. And as Evan stood to leave, feeling that new idea pulsing in the back of his mind, he wondered whether he would have the courage to act on it, or if fear would pull him back into the safe distance he was used to keeping. Evan walked out to the small parking lot behind the diner, because his thoughts felt too heavy to keep inside. The morning sun was brighter now, warming the hood of his car, but his chest felt tight in a way he couldn't shake. He leaned against the door and ran a hand over his forehead, trying to understand why the idea that had taken shape inside him both inspired and scared him at the same time. The thought of creating a profit-sharing program, something that could change lives across all his hotels and restaurants, felt like the right thing to do. But there was a knot in his stomach he couldn't ignore. He imagined the headlines twisting the story, calling it a publicity stunt. He imagined board members whispering that he had lost his edge. He imagined employees thinking he only did it to look generous, instead of actually caring. That fear, the fear of being misunderstood or judged, made him freeze in place, even though he knew the idea came from a real and honest place inside him. Mia stepped outside a few minutes later, wiping her hands on her apron, wondering why he had suddenly walked out like someone wrestling a storm inside. When she saw him standing alone, staring at the ground, her footsteps slowed. She felt a wave of doubt rise in her throat, the kind that made her question why someone like him would care about anything she said or did. Her mind replayed their talk, replayed the moment he said he had thought of her reaction all night. She wondered if she had said too much, or if she had made him feel judged without meaning to. She approached him carefully, asking if he was all right, and the way he looked up at her told her he wasn't. His eyes weren't cold or distant. They were full of something deeper, something that made her heart squeeze because she recognized the look of someone carrying a weight they weren't used to sharing. He confessed that he had been thinking about doing something bigger, something that could help people like her, like Luis, like so many who worked hard without getting much back. But the moment he started describing it, his voice faltered. He admitted he was scared. Scared people would think he was doing it for show, scared it would backfire, scared he didn't deserve to make that kind of change, because he had ignored the struggles of his own workers for so long. Mia listened in silence, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron, because part of her understood that fear more than she wanted to. She told him softly that good things are often misunderstood at first, and sometimes people push kindness away because they don't know how to trust it. Her words were gentle, but even as she spoke them, she felt uncertainty twisting inside her too. If he really went through with this idea, what if people placed attention on her she didn't know how to carry? What if they expected her to be something she wasn't? The thought of being held up as some kind of example made her chest tighten with a fear that she might disappoint everyone, even him. The wind pushed a loose strand of hair across her face, and she tucked it behind her ear while looking at him with quiet honesty. She said she wasn't sure she deserved any kind of spotlight. She said she didn't do anything special. She treated him kindly because that's how she believed the world should work, not because she was trying to prove anything. Her voice trembled a little when she said that, revealing more doubt than she meant to. Evan watched her closely, hearing every layer of insecurity she carried, and something softened in his expression. He stepped a little closer, not enough to overwhelm her, but enough to make clear he wanted her to feel safe. He told her that sometimes the people who think they don't deserve anything are the ones who actually inspire the biggest changes. And he said it with a sincerity that made her blink away the sting behind her eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was only the sound of a car passing on the highway and the distant clatter of dishes inside the diner. The space between them felt charged, not romantic, but heavy with the kind of truth people rarely say out loud. Mia looked down, unsure how to carry his words, and Evan looked away, unsure how to carry his fear. They were two people who lived in completely different worlds, yet both were trapped by worries that mirrored each other. He feared being seen as fake, she feared being seen as unworthy, and both stood there wondering whether the idea that connected them was strong enough to survive those doubts. Evan finally inhaled deeply, the type of breath someone takes before stepping into unknown territory, and Mia felt her heartbeat quicken as she sensed he was about to make a choice. But before he spoke, he hesitated again, stuck between courage and retreat, knowing whatever he said next could change both their lives in ways neither one knew how to prepare for. Evan sat alone that night at his kitchen table, the kind of silence around him that made every thought feel heavier than it should. The check lay in front of him, the ink already dry, the number big enough to change the diner's life for years to come. He had written it in a burst of conviction right after leaving Mia, thinking that putting the idea on paper would anchor his courage. But now, with the weight of the day sinking into him, doubt crept in again. He ran his thumb slowly across the edge of the check, imagining the moment he'd place it in the tip jar, imagining the shock on their faces, imagining the questions that would follow. What if people thought he was trying to buy admiration or forgiveness? What if the gesture made things harder for them instead of better? The fear twisted in his chest, turning his earlier resolve into something fragile. He pushed the check away, then pulled it back again, unable to settle on anything except the feeling that he was standing at the edge of a decision bigger than he was ready for. Meanwhile, at the diner, Mia stayed after closing with the soft hum of the fridge filling the empty room. She moved slowly as she wiped down the tables, her mind stuck on everything Evan had told her. Part of her felt grateful he trusted her with such personal thoughts, but the other part felt overwhelmed by the idea that she had inspired something so big. She wondered if she had said the wrong things, or if she had been too honest without thinking, and beneath it all, a small fear kept pushing forward. What if people started looking at her differently? What if her co-workers thought she had done something to attract attention or special treatment? She never wanted to be at the center of anything, never wanted eyes on her that might make her feel like she had to prove she was worth it. For a moment, she even considered quitting before any of this went further, telling herself that leaving now might save everyone the trouble. But then she pictured Luis working late again, and Sharon pushing through another long shift, and she felt the guilt rise like a slow tide. Leaving would only make things harder for the people she cared about, and that thought alone made her pause. In the quiet of her own thoughts, Mia realized she wasn't the same person she had been before meeting Evan in that old hoodie. His honesty had opened something inside her, and her words had opened something inside him. They were both standing in front of the same kind of fear, just from opposite sides. She touched the tip jar on the counter, remembering how she'd dropped that tiny tip inside without thinking, and she wondered how something so small had grown into something she didn't know how to hold. Her chest tightened, but there was also a warmth beneath the fear, a sense that maybe change was already happening, whether she wanted it or not. She turned off the lights one by one, letting the darkness settle as she locked the door, her steps slow and uncertain as she walked to her car. Back at Evan's place, he picked up the check again and held it to the light, the numbers reflecting against the window where the city lights glowed below. He knew the decision wasn't just about money. It was about what kind of man he wanted to be, what kind of leader he had failed to be for too long, and whether he had the courage to face the consequences of doing something truly generous, without worrying about appearances. He closed his eyes and pictured the diner as it had looked that morning, the way Mia had spoken about her co-workers with pride, the way the staff helped each other without expectation. That image softened his doubt but didn't erase it. He folded the check carefully, slid it into an envelope, and set it by the door. It was ready, but he still wasn't sure he was. It's in moments like these where people wonder what they would do in the same situation. Would they step forward even with fear, or hold back until everything felt safe? If you were in Evan's shoes or Mia's place, what choice would feel right to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're enjoying this journey, remember to subscribe so you don't miss where this story goes next. Evan took one last look at the envelope before turning off the light, and Mia paused in her parked car, with her hands on the wheel, both of them caught in the quiet space before a storm of change. One of them would have to move first, and neither knew how much that single step would reshape their lives. Evan woke up before his alarm, the kind of early morning where the world was grey and still, and every sound felt louder than usual. He sat on the edge of his bed with the envelope resting in his hand, its weight feeling far heavier than paper should allow. He had placed it by the door last night with the intention of walking straight out and delivering it without hesitation, but now his hand shook a little as he held it. The doubts from the night before had not disappeared. They had only grown quieter, sitting like a stone in his gut. He knew this day would decide something important, something that reached far beyond the diner's chipped counters and metal stools. Whatever he did now would show whether he was capable of acting from a place of truth rather than fear. He breathed deeply, slipped on his jacket and took the envelope with him, closing the door behind him as if he were sealing off the version of himself who always hesitated. The drive to the diner felt longer than usual, even though the streets were almost empty. Every stoplight seemed to hold its color too long, and every small vibration of the road made him think. He glanced at the envelope beside him on the seat, then looked away quickly, almost afraid it would judge him. He wondered what Mia must be feeling this morning. Had she slept at all? Had she decided whether to stay or leave? The idea of her quitting because of him made his chest pull tight. He didn't mean to complicate her life. He didn't mean to place her under a spotlight she never asked for. Yet his choices were dragging both of them into a moment that neither could avoid now. By the time he parked outside, his breath felt unsteady and his palms were damp, something he hadn't experienced since his earliest board meetings. The diner lights glowed warmly through the windows, and for a moment he just sat there watching silhouettes move inside, wondering if he had the right to step back into a world that had treated him with more honesty than he expected. Mia, inside, had been trying to keep her mind focused on small tasks, wiping the same counter twice, refilling the salt shakers even though they didn't need it. When she finally glanced up and saw his car outside, her stomach tightened. She hadn't decided how to feel about his return yet. She still felt overwhelmed by the idea that she might have influenced a major decision in his life, and the fear that she wasn't worthy of that kind of attention clung to her. She didn't know if she was ready to face whatever he had come to say. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her apron and told herself to breathe. But when he stepped through the door, the air in the diner shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore. Everything felt slower, quieter, as if the world itself paused to watch. He walked in with calm steps, holding the envelope close to his chest under his jacket, not yet ready to reveal it. He greeted the cook and Sharon with a nod, but his eyes went straight to Mia. She felt her heart stumble when she saw the hesitation in his expression, a mix of courage and fear tangled together. He approached slowly, and when he reached her side of the counter, they stood facing each other with a silence that carried everything they had both been fighting inside. He asked if they could talk again, and she nodded even though her pulse hammered in her throat. The tension between them wasn't anger, it was the weight of choices neither of them had fully made. They moved to the same quiet corner where they had spoken before. Evan rested his hands on the counter, gripping the edge as if anchoring himself. He told her he had written something yesterday, something he meant to bring to her, but he wasn't sure if giving it to her was the right thing to do. Mia felt the air tighten around them. She asked him why he was unsure, and he let out a breath so heavy it seemed to drop between them. He said he didn't want anyone to think she had asked for anything, or that he was trying to fix something with money. He didn't want the gesture to look fake or selfish. He didn't want her to suffer because of him. The honesty in his voice trembled just enough for her to hear the truth in it. She looked at him with soft eyes, feeling the mix of fear and sincerity that shaped every word he spoke. She told him she never wanted him to feel forced into any big gesture, and that she wasn't sure she could handle being the center of attention either. Their voices lowered as they admitted their fears, both realizing how similar their doubts actually were. It felt like standing at the edge of something wide and unfamiliar, something that could lift them both or swallow them if they stepped wrong. Before the story moves forward, take a moment to think about the position they're both in. Would you hand over that envelope knowing people might judge you, or would you hold back out of fear of misunderstanding? And if you were Mia, would you accept something that might change your life but also change how others see you? Share your thoughts, because choices like these reveal who we are more than we realize. Evan reached into his jacket slowly, pulling out the envelope but not placing it on the counter yet. He held it between them, its meaning hanging in the air like a question neither was ready to answer. Mia stared at it, her breath catching as she realized this wasn't just money. It was a decision about trust, responsibility, and the weight of being seen. The envelope remained suspended in his hand, the final decision unsaid, the moment stretched thin with suspense. Both of them knew that once he set it down everything would shift, but if he pulled it back, something inside them might break instead. And so they stood there, vulnerable in a way neither expected, waiting for someone to take the first brave step that would push their lives into the storm of change that was now impossible to avoid. Evan stood there holding the envelope between his fingers, still caught in that fragile moment where hesitation battled intention. Mia's breath stayed shallow as she tried to read the conflict in his eyes, sensing he was close to a choice he couldn't walk back from once it was made. The diner around them kept moving in its usual rhythm, the clatter of dishes and low conversations filling the space, but somehow everything felt quieter, as if the entire room was waiting alongside them. He looked at the envelope again, then at Mia, then toward the tip jar sitting near the register, half full of loose change and small bills. The sight of it seemed to push something loose inside him. He straightened his posture, inhaled slowly, and without giving himself time to rethink it, he stepped forward and walked toward the counter with a steady pace that made Mia's heart pound. The staff noticed the shift before they understood it. Louise paused with a spatula mid-air. Sharon froze while sorting receipts, and two customers near the window turned their heads. Evan stopped in front of the tip jar and held the envelope above it for a second, his hand trembling just enough for Mia to notice. She took a step closer, unsure whether she should stop him or support him. Then, with a quiet exhale, he placed the envelope into the jar, letting it fall between the bills with a soft sound that somehow felt louder than anything else in the room. Gasps broke out almost instantly. Louise whispered something under his breath, and Sharon covered her mouth with both hands. Mia stood completely still, shock rising so fast she could barely breathe. Evan faced the room, feeling the weight in his chest finally lift in a way that made him close his eyes for a brief second of relief. When he opened them again, the staff was staring at him with confusion, hope, and disbelief tangled together. Evan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, not the check, but his written announcement of the new profit-sharing program he had decided to create. His voice shook only once before steadying, as he explained that this gesture wasn't charity or guilt or a moment of pity. He told them it was the start of something bigger, something they deserved, and that the diner had shown him what teamwork and fairness looked like when practiced with real heart. He said Mia's kindness had reminded him that the people who make businesses run aren't just names on payroll sheets, but the reason anything works at all. Every word pressed deeper into the silence of the room until even the customers felt the weight of what he was saying. Mia felt her eyes fill before she could stop them. She wasn't used to being singled out like this, especially for something she never saw as extraordinary. Her hands trembled as she looked between Evan and the tip jar that now held a check she hadn't even touched. She whispered his name, not knowing what else to say, and when he turned toward her, the expression on his face was softer than she had ever seen it. She asked him why he would do something this huge, and he answered simply that fairness shouldn't be rare, and that people like her had been proving the meaning of integrity long before he ever stepped through that door. His voice cracked slightly on that last word, revealing just how much the moment meant to him. There are moments in stories and in real life when people watching from a distance feel something shift inside themselves, not because the event happened to them, but because it reminds them of the good they still hope exists in the world. Right now, anyone listening might feel their chest warm or their throat tighten, and it's comforting to know that others out there are experiencing the same wave of emotion. It makes the moment feel shared, even across miles and screens, the way hope often brings people together. When Evan finished speaking, the diner burst into a mix of shocked laughter and sudden tears. Luis placed both hands on the counter and lowered his head as if trying to take in the reality of what had happened. Sharon reached for the envelope with hesitant fingers but stopped midway, asking Evan if he was absolutely sure. He nodded, telling her the decision came from a place he hadn't listened to in a long time. Mia still stood frozen, trying to understand how her simple gesture the day before had grown into something none of them saw coming. She finally stepped forward and touched the envelope lightly, as though making sure it was real, then looked up at Evan with an expression that carried gratitude, disbelief, and a fear she wasn't sure how to express. He gave her a small, encouraging smile, the kind that said she wasn't alone in this moment and didn't need to fear what came next. But even with that reassurance, the air around them hummed with questions they weren't ready to face yet. What would this change for everyone? Would people accept this new program? Would it bring challenges none of them expected? The excitement and joy mixed with uncertainty, weaving together a feeling that something incredible had just begun, but its full impact was still waiting in the shadows beyond the diner's windows. As the staff gathered around the counter, still absorbing the shock, Evan glanced at Mia once more, knowing this moment marked a turning point, not only for the diner, but for everything he believed about people and himself. And though joy was beginning to rise in the room like a warm tide, there was still a sense that the next step would reveal even more, something none of them had yet imagined, but could already feel inching closer. The diner felt charged with a kind of energy none of them had ever lived before. After the shock hit and the envelope settled inside the tip jar, everything broke open at once. Luis came around the counter, wiping his eyes with the back of his arm even though he tried to pretend he wasn't crying. Sharon hugged him so tightly that his glasses crooked sideways, and then she hugged Mia, who didn't even know how to react yet. The customers clapped without really understanding the details, moved simply by the emotion filling the room. Mia stood frozen in the middle of it all, her breath trembling every time she tried to speak. She finally placed both hands on the counter to steady herself, as if the solid surface could help her carry the moment. Evan watched her carefully, not stepping in yet, giving her space to take it in the way she needed. Mia reached into the tip jar with shaking fingers and slowly lifted the envelope as if it were made of glass. Holding it didn't make things any clearer. It only made the reality heavier. She looked at Evan, her voice barely coming out as she whispered that she didn't know how to deal with something so big, that she wasn't sure she knew how to deserve it. The words poured from her with the kind of honesty that came when fear mixed with gratitude until the feelings were impossible to separate. She said she didn't want anyone thinking she had asked for special treatment or tried to get attention. She didn't want anyone resenting her for something she never wanted in the first place. The staff around her grew quiet, listening with soft eyes, sensing how much this moment weighed on her. She pressed the envelope to her chest and lowered her head, trying to hide the tears she didn't want anyone to see. Evan stepped forward with a calm she didn't have yet. He told her gently that none of this was about perfection, and none of it was about her needing to be anything more than who she already was. He said her character had spoken louder than any amount of money he had ever spent, and that the program he was creating wasn't a reward for a mistake or a test, or even a gesture of pity. It was a long overdue correction to how he had been running things for years. He told her that what inspired him wasn't a grand action, but the simplest kind of fairness, the kind most people stop paying attention to as life gets harder. His voice softened even more when he said she wasn't responsible for carrying anything alone. The room stayed silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights above them, as if the diner itself was listening. Mia lifted her head slowly, her eyes red but clearer. She looked at him with a mix of fear and gratitude that made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't used to. She asked him what he expected from her now, and he shook his head gently, telling her he didn't expect anything except for her to keep being herself. She didn't have to lead anything, didn't have to make speeches or change how she worked. She only had to believe that small actions mattered more than she realized. The relief that washed through her didn't erase the fear, but it softened the edges enough for her to breathe again. She nodded slowly, absorbing each word, feeling the warmth of acceptance settle in her chest. A moment like this, when emotions calm just enough for clarity to form, often hides the biggest shift still to come. It's the kind of pause before the next turn, the kind where people think the hard part is done, but life is already preparing the next step they don't see yet. This is where the story starts pushing toward the point of no return, even if the hope in the room makes everyone believe things are finally settling. Louise walked over and placed a hand on Mia's shoulder, telling her the team stood behind her no matter what. Sharon said she'd never seen anything like this in her life, and that if anyone deserved to inspire change, it was the girl who always treated every customer like they mattered. Their words pulled more tears from Mia, not from fear this time, but from the warmth of belonging. She hugged them both, feeling her heart swell with a mix of relief and disbelief. Around them, the customers slowly returned to their meals, though more than one wiped a tear or shook their head in amazement. Life inside the diner began moving again, but something fundamental had changed. The staff felt lighter, like a weight none of them realized they carried had finally rolled away. Then Mia turned toward Evan again, holding the envelope gently now instead of gripping it with fear. She said thank you with a voice steady enough to show the courage slowly forming inside her. She thanked him for trusting the truth she had shown without meaning to, thanked him for listening, thanked him for doing something real instead of just talking about it. He nodded, touched in a way he didn't hide anymore. He felt the relief of knowing he had made the right choice, a deep warmth spreading through him as he saw what his decision meant to people who had spent their lives working without expecting more than survival. But under that warmth, something else flickered, something he couldn't quite name yet, a small tension, a quiet awareness that generosity this big always brings consequences, not just gratitude. Mia felt it too, a subtle pressure building beneath the joy, as if the floor beneath them was shifting in ways they couldn't see. She held the envelope close once more, and the room felt like it paused again, sensing that while this moment was beautiful, the story wasn't finished. Something important still waited just outside the door of the diner, something that would test whether all this hope could hold steady when the world reacted to what had just taken place. And both of them knew, without saying a word, that whatever came next would decide the true shape of the change they had started. The diner slowly calmed after the wave of emotions, but Evan and Mia both felt the same quiet pull inside them, something telling them they weren't finished. Sharon noticed it too and gently nudged Mia toward the back hallway, giving her a soft smile that said everything without words. Evan followed at a respectful distance, unsure whether he was walking toward clarity or another kind of uncertainty. The hallway behind the kitchen was dimmer and quieter, with only the distant hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Mia leaned back against the wall, still holding the envelope close to her chest, grounding herself with its weight. Evan stopped a few steps away, his hands at his sides, no longer hiding behind confidence or careful posture. He looked like a man finally ready to speak truths he had carried alone for far too long. She asked him gently what had made him think the world worked only through money, and he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck the way someone does when they're opening a wound. He told her about the early years of his business, how friends he trusted drifted away when he refused investments, how people smiled wider when his signature appeared on checks than when he entered a room. He shared memories of celebrations that felt empty, because every compliment was tied to profit, not character. He spoke about nights where he lay awake, wondering if anyone would still sit beside him if the money disappeared. Mia listened without interrupting, letting his voice spill out everything he had kept locked behind success and polished suits. His words were steady, but carried a tremble every time he admitted a moment that had chipped away at his trust. He said that somewhere along the way he stopped believing people saw him as a person at all, and once that belief took root, it began shaping every part of him without him noticing. Mia lowered her gaze to the floor, feeling a deep ache for him, not for the wealth he carried, but for the loneliness he hid behind it. She stepped a little closer, just enough to make the space feel shared. She told him that she treated him kindly, not because she guessed who he was or because she expected anything in return, but because she had grown up seeing how much a simple gesture could matter. She told him how her mother would work long shifts and come home tired, but still make time to show kindness to neighbors, even the ones who never gave anything back. She learned early that people carry invisible battles, and kindness is sometimes the only thing that catches them before they fall. Her voice softened when she said that treating everyone equally wasn't something she practiced. It was simply who she was. shaped by a life where fairness was more valuable than money would ever be. He felt his chest tighten at her words, not from fear this time, but from recognition, like hearing a truth he had forgotten existed. Her honesty felt like a mirror held gently in front of him, reflecting the man he wanted to be instead of the one he had become. He told her that her actions had forced him to face parts of himself he had been avoiding, parts shaped by hurt and disappointment. She nodded slowly, understanding more than he expected. She admitted she had been afraid too, afraid that she wasn't worthy of inspiring something so big, afraid that stepping into the light of someone else's decision might make her stumble. The vulnerability in her voice made the hallway feel smaller, intimate in a way that pulled them both closer to the heart of the moment. He took a slow breath and said he didn't want her to ever feel she had to change who she was to make others comfortable. She met his eyes and said she didn't want him to hide behind wealth anymore, not from the world and not from himself. That sentence hung between them like a soft bridge forming over years of misunderstanding. He felt something warm spread through him, a sense of release that came not from the act of giving but from finally being understood. She felt the same warmth, realizing that in helping him see people differently, he had helped her see herself differently too. She wasn't just someone surviving day to day, she was someone capable of changing the direction of another person's life without meaning to. The hallway felt lit from within, not by lamps, but by the quiet truth they were exchanging. He stepped closer until they stood only a breath apart, the emotional distance between them now thin and fragile. He thanked her in a voice that carried depth and sincerity, thanking her not for the reaction she gave, but for the example she lived. She whispered that she didn't think she had done anything extraordinary, and he answered that sometimes the smallest actions show the biggest courage. Her eyes softened at that, the tension in her shoulders melting as if she finally allowed herself to believe she mattered in ways she never expected. They stood there, not needing to fill the silence, letting the connection root itself in a way that promised steadiness. The world outside the hallway kept turning, but in this narrow space they felt suspended in a moment where healing and understanding wrapped around them like a warm blanket. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was the soft kind of turning point that changes lives slowly but permanently. When they finally stepped apart, they did so with a shared sense of certainty, knowing the hardest emotional battles had been faced, and that what remained was the final stretch of the journey, the part where everything they had built would be tested in the open. Mia looked toward the door leading back to the diner, and Evan gave a small nod, both sensing the story wasn't done yet. Something awaited them just beyond that hallway, something that would complete the path they had walked together. Weeks later, the diner carried a different kind of life inside its walls, a lightness that wasn't there before, but felt as natural as the smell of pancakes drifting through the morning air. The staff moved with more ease, laughing more often, sharing stories while wiping tables or pouring coffee. Even customers noticed the change without knowing exactly what had happened. The profit-sharing program had started small but steady, enough to give everyone breathing room they hadn't felt in years. Luis no longer looked exhausted from double shifts, and Sharon walked with a new confidence, planning repairs and upgrades the diner had needed for too long. Behind the counter, a small framed copy of the check hung discreetly near the register, a reminder of the night everything turned. Mia, now officially the team leader, carried herself with a calm strength she never imagined she would have. She still did the same work, still checked on every table with her usual warmth, but there was a difference in her voice, a steadiness that came from knowing her kindness had shaped the future of people around her. When the staff had voted her into the position, she almost cried from disbelief, but they insisted she was the one who held them together even before anyone realized it. She accepted the role slowly, letting herself grow into it day by day, and discovered she could guide others without losing the gentleness that made her who she was. Her mother noticed the change first, saying she looked brighter, like a burden had finally lifted from her shoulders. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and the diner's neon sign began to glow, Evan walked in quietly. He didn't arrive in a suit or with a driver. He came the same way he had the very first time, wearing simple clothes and an expression softened by weeks of reflection. The bell above the door chimed, and only Mia noticed at first. She smiled with a softness that spoke of everything they had already lived through together, and he returned the smile with a nod. He sat at the counter, and she poured him a cup of coffee without either of them needing to ask anything. The room buzzed around them with the sound of plates and conversation, but somehow their corner felt calm, almost peaceful. He asked how things were going, and she told him about the improvements, the new grill, the paid training Sharon had wanted for so long, and how Luis finally had weekends free to spend with his kids. She explained how the team had begun setting small goals, things they used to only dream about. Evan listened with genuine pride growing in his chest, a warmth that settled deeper with every word she shared. He felt none of the fear or hesitation that once held him back. Instead, he felt something simple and full, the feeling of having done something right without expecting applause. She asked how things were on his end, and he told her he had started talking more directly with the employees in his own hotels, asking questions instead of relying on reports, learning things he had ignored for years. He said it felt like waking up after a long sleep. There was a moment of quiet between them, the kind that didn't feel empty, but full of unspoken understanding. Mia looked around the diner, watching the people she cared about thrive in ways she never thought she would see, and she felt tears gather again, not from fear this time, but from gratitude that ran deep enough to ache. She turned back to Evan and thanked him, not just for the program or the check, but for listening, for trusting her, for allowing her small gesture to become something that mattered beyond her imagination. He shook his head gently and told her she had done more than she realized. He said that sometimes life changes not from grand plans, but from a single honest moment that opens a door. He said her quiet dignity had reminded him what fairness looked like when stripped of everything else. The diner door opened, letting in a soft breeze that carried the smell of fresh rain. The light inside reflected against the windows, turning the scene warm and golden, almost like a picture someone would keep for years. Evan looked at the tip jar on the counter. It was fuller now, always fuller, because people had heard rumors about the place where kindness had started something big. Mia followed his gaze and laughed softly, the sound carrying a new confidence he hadn't heard from her before. In her smile, he saw the full circle of everything that had brought them here, from a tiny tip to a new beginning none of them had planned. The night moved gently around them. The staff finished their tasks with light spirits, and the diner felt like a place reborn. Evan prepared to leave, but before he stood, he told Mia he hoped she never doubted how much she mattered, not because of what he did, but because of who she already was. She held his gaze, the warmth between them settled and steady, and thanked him again for choosing courage the day he returned with the envelope. He stepped outside into the cool night, glancing back through the window to see her laughing with her team, the glow of the diner making her look like the center of a small world filled with hope. And he realized the truth that would stay with him forever. The smallest act of integrity can become someone's fortune without ever meaning to. Before we close, pause for a moment and ask yourself something. If a single gesture of fairness could change someone else's life the way Mia's did, what gesture would you choose to make? And if you were Evan, would you have had the courage to follow through even with fear pressing on your chest? Share what this ending awakened in you, because your words might inspire someone else listening right now. And if this story touched you, write your first and last name in the comments to show you stayed with us until the end. Thank you for being here, for feeling this journey with us. If this story warmed something in your heart, leave a like so we know these tales matter to you. And if you want more stories that carry emotion, justice, and real human change, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. In fact, if the message of integrity in this story moved you, the next video will shake you even more, because it shows how a simple family secret can rewrite someone's entire life. Just click and keep the journey going.